Giving to the church is a good thing. It's a good thing first because it sets our priorities in life. It reminds us that what we're actually doing is returning to God a little piece of what God's already given to us. It sets priorities for our life so that we don't ever forget that God is the source of everything that we do, everything that we are, everything that we accomplish. Giving to the church is also a good thing because it does good things. When people see the church active in the world, they see the open arms of Jesus embracing the world. They see the hands and feet of Christ active. You and I are the resurrected Jesus in this world. And when we give, we supply the resources for ministry that makes us visible. We feed the hungry. We help those who are struggling day to day. We take care of the sick and the dying. We do the ministry of the church. And we do so because we share our resources together. I invite you to watch this following presentation that was presented as a part of our stewardship gatherings this year to find out what it is that we give for, how we spend our money, and an answer to some of the questions that people have. Thanks for watching. Abundant Gifts for Abundant Love, God's Call and Provision for the Mission of the Congregation. This is the second part of a presentation given to the congregation as part of our First We Give of Ourselves emphasis for stewardship. There's a lot of reasons that people might give to a congregation. Sometimes it's out of guilt or obligation. Sometimes it's because we think we have to. Sometimes it's, because the congregation asked. But unlike giving to a nonprofit organization as a worthy cause, unlike giving as something that we kind of begrudgingly do, giving to the congregation is first about giving to God. Giving to the congregation is an act of love and trust in the God who's given us everything that we have. It's an act of loving God back. It's a discipline that grows generous hearts. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So when we invest our money in offering, it places our treasure where our heart is supposed to be. Our heart is supposed to be tuned to God and our neighbor. It's participation in God's reign, the future of God, the healing of the world, however we imagine the future. It's participation in what God wants the world to be about and what the church is called to do. We do it together. We do it as one people. So therefore it's an act of unity. We're in this all together. When one of us doesn't do what we're supposed to do, it makes other people do it for us. And so giving is an act of unity where we all participate and share in the same mission of the congregation. It's also an act of witness. It tells people what we trust and who we trust. It tells us that God's abundance is shown through us because we trust that God will give us what we need. The question that always comes up is, what do we use the money for? Although the question is usually asked, what do you use the money for? But there's really no you or us and them in the church. Us is them. It's like the old Pogo cartoon. We've seen the enemy and they are us. So the question is really, what do we use the money for? What do the offerings go for? It's an interesting question. And I ask you to take a moment to kind of look around you in the world. Look around you as you imagine the congregation. Name the blessings that you receive from the congregation, from God, from neighbors who are caring and concerned. Look around those things and you'll find the root of why we give. It's in the building that allows us to have worship and to host community groups, that allows the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts to be here. It allows quilts to be made. It allows all kinds of things to take place. Our children are taught here. All of us that we receive is invested in the reign of God to share God's love, our mission. Every dime, every penny that comes into the offerings is invested not in something frivolous and not in something you can't trust. It's invested in the mission of God, building the reign of God in the world. Our mission is share God's love, and that's what we do with every dollar and penny that's received. Our giving is guided by our values and beliefs as a congregation. We've worked very hard over the last few years to establish these values and beliefs. So whatever offering we have is guided by values. We value authentic worship, and so our giving, the offering that we receive, will be spent on things that undergird authentic worship in the world. Worship that communicates God's love and gospel. Worship that is in sync with the traditions of the church, but also relevant to daily life. Giving will also offer radical hospitality to those in the world who need it. It will reach out to people who don't think they have a place in the community. It'll reach out to people who are pretty sure that they sit on the outside edges of the world with nobody caring about them. And our hospitality will help them to find a place. Our giving is a fearless witness in that we use it to show the world that no matter what happens and no matter what the cost might be, we're willing to share and to grow and to share God's love no matter what. Our money is spent for spiritual transformation of children, of adults, of people, folks who come to our food pantry and little ones who are singing in our choirs. All of it is about spiritual transformation. The offering is spent to be generous to the world, to be extravagant in that generosity as we share with other aspects of the church through our synod and our church-wide organization, other partners in mission like Lutheran Services of Iowa and Mosaic, and each other, the folks that come to our door and ask for help. Our money is given so that we can show intentional compassion to the world, as we care for the homebound and the sick, as we care for those who need food in the food pantry, the hungry of the world, as we care for those who are broken and wrestling with disease and illness, those who grieve. All of these core values guide how we spend the offering that we receive, and everything we do is undergirded by them. In addition to those values, there are beliefs that we hold to, beliefs that guide how we spend our money. We spend our money because God is love that binds together everyone and everything. God is the source of all that we have, and so the money belongs to God in the first place. God's love is guaranteed for all through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and so we lift up that story of his life, death, and resurrection as the means of finding God in the world. God's love is not earned, but is a free gift to broken people, and so our offering is dedicated to those broken people, that they might find Jesus Christ. God's love is poured out when God's people gather around word, water, wine, and bread. And so our offering is contributed to the cause of having worship that proclaims the good news of Jesus Christ through the methods that God has given us, through the preaching and hearing of the word, through the sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion. That's where the church is. That's where we find God, so that's where we spend our money. God's love is shared abundantly when God's people are the hands, feet, and open arms of Jesus. So our offerings are given to help neighbors in need. Our offerings are given to send turkey sandwiches out to people who can't get home on Thanksgiving Day. Our offerings are used to make sure that all of the people who come in contact with this place find Jesus through our actions. We believe that God's love transforms us to be the people that God created us to be, and so our offering is an act of transformation from being concerned with ourselves mostly to being concerned with neighbors. Our giving is a discipline that transforms us into being more like God each and every time we give. The core values of the congregation are part of a complex that guides every single decision we make, from how many postage stamps we buy, to how many copies we make, to how much we share with our synod and the world beyond. All of this is guided by the values and beliefs and driven by the mission of the congregation, which is to share God's love so that we attain the vision, which is to be the open arms of Jesus in the world. These things undergird every single thing we do. When you give to the congregation, you can be absolutely sure that every decision we make will be guided by these values, these beliefs, this mission, and this vision. If it isn't about these things, then the money won't be spent. The money is managed by standing ministry areas. There are places where it is organized into places that we expand our mission. Worship, learning, inviting, outreach, care and discipleship and stewardship are the ways that we organize the budget so that we know how to spend our money best. Every program, expense, and income is guided by our identity and organized by these SMAs. There are a lot of questions sometimes that people ask, and some of them get asked over and over again. So I want to take a moment to share with you some financial facts about the congregation. There are sometimes questions about the debt that the congregation has. It's not unusual for congregations to carry debt, especially in our day and age, and it's not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you do it irresponsibly. In our case, the debt that we carry has been to build a building so that we can teach our children, so that we can have office space, so that we can have a hospitable place to welcome folks. Our present mortgage debt is $846,000. We owe that to Thrivent Financial, and it was last renegotiated in 2011. In 2010, our mortgage debt was $1.158 million. We've reduced the principal on our debt since 2010 by $312,000. The payment that we make each month is paid out of general receivables. There's not a special fund that we pay the mortgage payment out of. Each month, about $9,000 goes to Thrivent to pay the principal and the interest that's accrued since the earlier payment in the prior month. Now, we do have a fund where additional money is designated for debt reduction, and people have given generously to that. Since 2010, we've received about $98,000 to be used for principal reduction. And we gather that and pay it to Thrivent as a principal reduction a few times a year. So on, say, a quarterly basis, we collect enough interest and income, and then we distribute what's been given for just principal reduction. So far, we've dispersed 88 of the 98,000 that we received, and anticipate in the third quarter of this year that we will distribute the 10,000 difference. Right now, if you take the amortization schedule that would have guided how much our balance should be, you would find that we should be, with just principal and interest payments as scheduled, at $935,000. You'll notice that we are $88,000 ahead of that, which matches exactly the amount of money that we've dispersed in principal. So when you give money to decrease the debt, it's given to decrease the debt. Even when that doesn't happen, our payments are paid out of the general receivables that are part of the weekly offering that are placed in the plate. Without that offering, we can't pay the mortgage. Sometimes questions are asked in the congregation about personnel. Don't we have too many staff? Aren't we spending too much of our money on staff? Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer. There's certain work that must be done. There's certain things that have to take place. What I can say is that at the end of 2010, right before I was called as the lead pastor of the congregation, there were 13 full-time equivalent program staff. This doesn't include musicians. It's just the program staff that does the day-to-day work of ministry. This included 2 open positions that were called for in the transition task force plan that had been adopted that year. One was for a full-time music and worship director. The other was for a full-time executive that would take care of all the administrative things that have to happen in the congregation. As of today, we currently have 10.5 full-time equivalents on the program staff. So you can see we're quite a bit below what we were in 2010. We have hired the full-time music director, but never hired the executive. We have reduced staff otherwise. And so right now we have 10.5 full-time people who are working on making sure that the work of a large congregation gets done. Some people ask me whether it's not expecting too much to pay the budget that we plan. I guess that's a subjective kind of thing to ask, but there is a potential for giving in the congregation that is untapped. We currently have 840 active households in the congregation, people who regularly worship and give to the congregation. 210 of those households may come, but they don't give to support the mission, so the rest of it falls to the rest of the folks to make sure that the budget is made. That means that 630 households are active contributors. What's the potential? How much can we afford? Well, with 840 active households and Ankeny's median income at $83,000 a year per household, you can do some math and figure out very quickly that about $65 million a year is available to the congregation's households. If you tithed on that, that'd be $6.5 million, which is quite a bit more than the $1.1 million that we receive in offerings. If that's unreasonable, then we can cut it down to half a tithe and still be at $3.2 million, or even down to the 2.1 or 2.2% that is average in a congregation, which we don't quite make, and find that we would still have $250,000 more dollars than we do if everyone gave even an average amount. So the answer is yes, we have the personnel. We have the right potential to give what we need to do, that our personnel is not bloated, and that the money given is reducing our debt and everything else that it's designated for. When we look at how our spending is distributed, we manage it in the following way. 15% of everything that we get goes to worship. It costs about $3,800 a week to have worship 4 times. Outreach, which includes the benevolence that we send off to other places and keep here for assisting others, is about 11% of our budget. Learning, teaching kids in confirmation and church school and adult education, makes up about 22% of our overall spending. Care and discipleship ministries, such as small groups, care for the homebound, pastoral care initiatives, all take up about 5%. Inviting and evangelism take up another 5%. There are a lot of expenses that are distributed equally among these areas. We call that stewardship. It's the infrastructure, it's the utilities, it's the building costs, the maintenance, the copy machine. And that's about 42% of everything that we take in. So 60% of what comes in actually goes out in ministry, while 42% of it stays here so that all of the other ministries can run. Some things that you should know about financial management. We are right now reorganizing our general ledger system so that it's more transparent and easily understandable for the whole congregation when you want to see it. We're also moving our fiscal year to begin August 1st in the coming year. This will line up the programs of the congregation with the actual budget more effectively. Since everything starts up about the time of the school year, we'll start up our budget then. The other part of this is that income comes in to the congregation very largely in the third quarter of the calendar year, mostly in December, where a whole quarter's worth of income is received in 1 month. On a calendar system, we wait until the very last month of our fiscal year to receive most of our income, and that means that we spend the rest of the year wondering what will happen. So by moving to August 1st, we'll receive that income more upfront. In 2016, we're hoping that a growth in general giving, we're hoping for at least 10% growth, will allow us to do a number of things. First, we hope it will make it finally possible to stop charging families separately from their offering for church school and confirmation. We're one of the few congregations that you could find that charges tuition for these two things. And it seems like God's Word and God's faith, since it's given freely by God, shouldn't have a cost attached to it as we do it in the congregation. Additionally, we think that even if you don't have kids at home, since we're all in this together, Since we cooperate and hold the mission of the church in common, we all share a responsibility to pass the faith on to the next generation. And so even if the children are grown up, like my wife and I, then we should still be sharing in how we pass that on to even the smallest children in the congregation. Second, we want to establish a consistent major repair budget for the building and systems. We have balanced the budget, sadly, over the last few years by not doing the things that were necessary to keep the building up, and now we are facing a capital campaign to do some of those things. We need to make sure that we take care of the building. It will fall down, it will break, it will collapse. As a matter of fact, we have a joke in the office when we come in the morning to ask what broke today. That's not a complaint, that's just the realization that buildings deteriorate. The sanctuary that we have and all of the systems that heat and cool it and provide power were all built in the early 60s. They need attention. The roof leaks. There's a number of other things that are constantly being repaired. We need to set aside money each year, and right now we can't. We need to initiate a public communication program, advertising, if you will, to share God's love with Ankeny. That's our mission. Our new mission statement, to share God's love, needs to be shared with the community so that they know that we want to share God's love with them. Now that we have our values and our mission and our vision and our beliefs all in place, we need to share that with the community so that they know who we are and how they can be part of it. We need to work back to giving at least 10% mission support to our synod. The ELCA's agreed upon amount for all congregations is actually 15%, and we've fallen well below that. We're now barely making 8%, actually a little less than that, and we need to work back to 10%, a tithe. If we ask the congregation to think about tithing, we together all have to do that as well. We need to expand our food pantry and our assistance work. The people who are coming to get help from both of those programs, well, there's more of them than we can handle, and we just don't have the money to do what we need to do. So by your offering, you'll help us to expand our efforts to feed the hungry and to give assistance to those who are in need. We need to cover increases in costs and compensate staff fairly. Those are all the things that we hope to do in 2016 with a 10% or more increase in our giving. We want to ensure that worship and music continue to blossom. We are becoming known as a congregation that has high-quality worship and music. We are a congregation that's coming to be known as a place where the quality of worship brings people to hear God's Word, and we need to make sure that we have the resources to continue to grow that. We need to keep mission momentum going while we engage in a capital campaign to raise the money to fund our vision and to repair the building. We need to make sure that mission's happening so that when our new plans are all in place, we have a reason to be. Thanks for taking the time to watch this presentation about our mission and our vision and our future. I'd like to ask you, as pastor of the congregation, to help us to grow 10% or more in our giving this year so that we can meet our goals and witness to God's love in the world. Now that's going to mean that some of us will have to grow more than 10% because others won't be able to grow quite that much. Actually, I'd like you to consider thinking about tithing, giving 10%, the first 10% of what you receive to God. Together, we will end up with the abundance that God has given us to do mission and more. If you can't tithe, then I ask that you think about a plan to work toward it over the next year or two. My wife Cindy and I have been tithers for quite some time, and some years it's really easy, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. Medical bills and family emergencies, house repairs always seem to come along and make us wonder if we can actually give. And I'll be honest, once in a while we fall behind because those expenses demand attention. But we always try to catch up, and no matter how hard it may be, we're always glad that we did it because it reminds us constantly that God gave it to us first, that we wouldn't be able to pay those medical bills, we wouldn't be able to have those doctors, that we wouldn't be able to repair the home or raise our family if God hadn't first given to us. Help us to grow in this year. Help us to grow so that we can share God's love. Thank you.